And get the pleasure of introducing this evening our guest lecturer. This is the LGB Courage Coalition's monthly webinar lecture available for our paid subscribers to our Substack and Informed Dissent. If you are not able to meet us for any of our live events, paid subscribers also get the recording sent out the Monday after. This evening, we have one of my good friends, Sara Stockton. She's a licensed medical family. No, how do I say this? Licensed
Marriage
and family therapist, lecturer, researcher, and clinical supervisor with over 15 years experience specializing in gender dysphoria among youth and families. In 2013, she co-authored one of the first U.S. mental health assessments for evaluating youth readiness for medical transition, published in the Journal of Marital and Family Therapy. Growing concerned that prevailing clinical approaches were harming young people in her care, Stockton began publicly addressing these issues, and she was in the 2022 documentary, What is a Woman? She collaborates with prominent figures and whistleblowers through podcasts, conferences, and advocacy to improve care. Sara has testified in state legislatures on bans regarding transgender care for minors and has served as an expert witness in family court cases involving child protective services. Her work focuses on promoting evidence-based care for individuals and prioritizing their long-term well-being. Sara, I'm going to go ahead and let you take over.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and share and see if it works here. All right. You're seeing it okay, right, Jamie? Okay. Well, thank you everyone for having me here. And guys, just bear with me. This is my first sort of lecture without interaction, so I am a little bit more accustomed to speaking to people, so this is a little different. So again, bear with me. Just want to thank LGB Courage Coalition for having me here, and frankly, they've been a big part of my journey in general with helping the people, gender distressed youth, so I really do appreciate that. Again, I'm just going to share a little bit about me and my background. Really quick, I just want to read a disclosure about my presentation today. Everything I share today comes from my own clinical experience over the past 20 years working with adolescents and families, combined with publicly available research from sources including the CDC, NHS, SEGM, and peer-reviewed studies. These are my professional observations and interpretations of the current state of the field. Other clinicians may hold different views. And obviously, since we're talking about the need of therapy, if you or your child are currently experiencing severe emotional distress, suicidal thoughts, self-harm, or any other danger to self or others, please go ahead and contact emergency 911, 988, which is the suicide prevention lifeline, or obviously local mental health crisis team. And this is obviously this is just educational. This is not a substitute for individual medical or psychological advice. And I think it's really important to recognize that good, careful therapists do exist, and timely professional help can be life-saving when chosen wisely. So just a little bit about me, a little bit more, just so you guys have a kind of a context of who I am and what I do, is I've been in the field of counseling this is on my 20th year. I started my work, actually I was working with the criminally insane. That's where, back in 2004, where I started. I was working with individuals who had pretty violent pasts, chopped up their children and ate them. I've always been pretty comfortable with working with the high conflict individuals. I wanted to work in the prisons. I wanted to work with intense clients, but my husband had other ideas for me at the time and suggested that I did not go ahead and work in that kind of environment. I always had I might work for the FBI or something like that. So when deciding to go into grad school, weirdly enough, I lost a boyfriend when I was 14. He committed suicide, and I knew from that moment I was going to be a therapist. And I think that's important to kind of talk about because many of us in this field go in it with some sort of personal story or background. And I think good therapy, good supervision, good clinical practice, you do learn how to get out of that, you're not healing yourself through healing others per se, but being able to experience what you did, you do use that in the therapy room. I do think we've taken that to an extreme, and I will talk a little bit about that. I really loved working with people, and at the time when you kind of decide what route you go to for therapy, because there's many routes and we'll go through them all. The reason why I picked marriage and family therapy in particular versus social work, clinical psychology, all the other ones, because with marriage and family therapy, the major point of their work is that it's systemic. It's not about just the individual being the problem. It was everyone contributes to the problem. Let's serve families as a whole. And I really liked that. I also, again, had this kind of tendency to want to go and work with the taboo topics. So I really had an idea of okay, I'm going to go work and deal with sort of sex therapy, that sort of stuff. I end up entering grad school. I think it's important just so you guys know what years we're talking about. I entered grad school in 2008. In 2008, one of the top researchers at Syracuse University at the time had just published the major mental health assessment to utilize when recommending transsexuals, we called it at the time, medical transition. So she wrote the adult assessment. When I came into grad school, we were told, and we actually had people from the Dutch come over to talk to us about what was going on in terms of the puberty blockers, and really presented to us, hey, we want you guys as clinicians to lead the pact with helping these youth, helping them kind of struggle through this puberty time, this distress, really use these puberty blockers as an aid to figure things out. This is how it was presented there. And I was tasked with, a couple of us were tasked with writing a mental health assessment, specifically addressing the needs in youth. So the youth assessment was obviously way more comprehensive in terms of hopefully attending to needs of social peer dynamics, informed consent, parental dynamics, mental health, future expectations, and all that. So I started working primarily with the transgender youth. I probably have recommended transition for hundreds of families. With that, ever since I've been in grad school, since grad school on, I've supervised counselors, and I really will say that I almost love supervising other counselors just as much as I love actually doing therapy. So I spent a lot of my time working with teaching others, and I actually was employed at a university, and I worked primarily with adult learners. So we're not talking about the 18-year-olds. And I was a mentor and an adjunct professor up until they found out that I was speaking about transgender issues. And I say that because I've spent a lot of time formulating degree plans, actually talking to counselors about expectations, because even when you get into grad school, you don't know what that means. You don't know what the options are for licensure. It's very confusing. So since then I continue. I have graduate student interns at my practice right now. I supervise mental health counselors, social workers, MFTs when allowed. So, and I take bachelor's of psych students who are looking for an overall degree plan. So I really have a lot of experience teaching counselors, understanding what their curriculum is, getting a sense of what they know and what they don't know. And I will tell you that the training has changed. What I went through 15 years ago is nothing what they're going through now in terms of what I would think is comprehensive developmental and even ability to apply any skills. And we will talk about that a little bit more. I do want to say that there are days, I mean, even like it was kind of a joke when we were talking about me doing this lecture around if I had much to say, because, you know, a part of me wants to be like, don't go to therapy, because there's a lot of concerns there. And sometimes I might even suggest therapy to be one of the last options. And so you're going to hear a lot of things that might imply that I'm very disgruntled with my field or a lot of negativity. And while that's there, I am here to say that I love being a therapist. I have a quote from Carl Rogers says, in my early professional years, I was asking the question, how can I treat or cure or change this person? Now I would phrase the question in this way, how can I provide a relationship which this person may use for his own personal growth? And I just think it's such a wonderful opportunity. I get to experience the world in ways that I would never be able to if I wasn't a therapist. I work with neurosurgeons, people who are in prison, people who are hardcore communists, pagans, Christians, you know, people with different fetishes, now families going through a great deal of distress. And I definitely wouldn't be the person that I am without that. I think it makes me a well-rounded person. I see the world from so many different angles, and I'm so grateful to be a therapist. So I would not change that. I don't think I could do much without that. And so I'm just grateful for that. So I just say that as we go on, because there's a lot of things that I have concerns about. I thought it'd be just really important is to really quickly just kind of go over the demographics of therapy in general. People don't always kind of understand it, but we have here in 1895, Freud comes on the scene. This is really where the talk therapy comes out, right? So this is where couch talk. This is no elite women. Women were still the primary clientele. That is still the case, although we're going to talk about how that is shifting. But we were talking like 80% of these people were women. We had the hysteria movement that was sort of going on here. And it wasn't until like the 1950s, 1970s where we come into this expanded Rogers client-centered situation, and insurance comes on the scene. And this is really important because the education shifted, the colleges really opened up in terms of this being a thing that lots of people could do. Becoming a psychoanalysis back in the day, you actually had to have an MD. So it was very difficult for just the average person to become and go into this field. Then we go into the 1980s. This is where CBT boom comes out. Insurance goes wild, right? It's evidence-based, and but still, it's mostly white women. Still, that's the primary clientele. So then, as we continue, before 2010, older adults, 45 and up, dominated everything that was happening. It wasn't until 2010 where we started seeing an extreme increase in youth, with 1 out of 3 youth now saying they would like counseling. So we see it. And then obviously we have 2019. What happens in 2019? We have COVID. That puts into place like telehealth. Then we have therapy doubling. Then we have BetterHelp. We have all the ways that we can get into urban places better, rural places. So everything is increased, sometimes threefold. And men in the last just 5 years have increased going to therapy by 20%. So now we're starting to see a lot more people come in. So key shifts over time, just going over it a little bit more. So this is data from the CDC. Nearly 1 in 3 youth, 12 to 17, experienced a mental, emotional, or behavioral health issue in the last year. 51% of those with conditions accessing treatment annually. So we're talking about 50% of our youth actually going and receiving some sort of treatment. College educated seem to be the biggest indicators, like, well, not the biggest indicator, but you tend to have more access once you're college educated. We have the insurance. That was the biggest thing with people with lower socioeconomic status still, even in 2025, are not being reached, although like with BetterHelp, that is seeming to build some bridges. And even with that, there's still about 20% of youth that are not getting their needs met. So people that are saying they want treatment and don't have access to it, and there's a lot of different reasons, whether it's insurance, just what kind of therapy is allowed. And then whites still being the primary race and ethnicity that seeks therapy. And now with telehealth, there's been about 10% increase in the Black and Hispanic community. Whoop. How can I go back? Oh, wait. There we go. Another thing, just I think it's important that we're going to talk about is there is a lot of shifts in terms of who is coming. So 42% of population that seeks out therapy is Gen Z. Gen Z, I mean, there's arguments, but it's about like the age of 13 to 23, I think, around there. Another important thing, and we're gonna talk about this, is what's going on in our youth and what's going on with the gender explosion is social media. With most estimates, and I definitely took a lot of different percentages and kind of did the average, but they say by the age of 13, 54% of children have been introduced to pornography online, and this is including their own seeking it out and then just being introduced to it by friends. This is not a casual, oh, I flipped through Twitter and I saw a picture. This is actually like seeking a Pornhub site and everything like that. And then on top of, in particular with the gender issues, I put 85 because I think it's quite a bit. I have research studies that say 90% of the kids with gender dysphoria have comorbidities. Some are as low as 60. But irregardless, almost all the gender cases, there's issues such as ADHD, underlying trauma, depression, etc., which is, I think most of us are very aware of that. I think it's important to talk a little bit about the limitations to therapy. I mean, and in particular with dysphoria. I mean, obviously therapy aids dysphoria by building distress and building skills, easing distress, but it's not a standalone treatment and it's not guaranteed. I think one of the things we really have to look out for is these catch-all phrases. They say now 70% of therapists prioritize trauma-informed care. I decided to not do a deep dive into trauma-informed care. We could, but a lot of these terminologies that they place on, I feel like are duh. So although I might not have been explicitly trained in trauma-informed care, I have a hard time reconciling that most therapists would not be trained with trauma-informed knowledge. So there's a lot of these terminologies. I think one of the things that's going on is the AI chatbots. They, have 24-hour coverage. That is, the increase in that is dramatic. And I have also been a part of VR, immersive therapy, which is one of the catch-22 of, I think it's really good for exposure type work. But there are dangers, obviously, to bringing on and reinforcing technology and media in a group that's already really causing a lot of issues. Another big issue, I think, is there's a lot of push for the BIPOC and the LGBTQ plus affirmative therapists. And that, I think, is having barriers to understanding what treatment is going on. I also think what people don't understand when I put theoretical versus direct skills gap, most of our training is exclusively in an affirmative model. So there is not one type of therapy in terms of psychology, social work, mental health that is not 100% behind the affirmative model and looks at that as the lead of how to deal with this. So I think that's a really important thing to say. Also, I want you to know that in some cases, I couldn't find, but maybe 10% of any graduate degree, and this is different with psychologists, but I'm talking about licensed practitioners in this one, have less than 10% of their credits are even given to anything related to youth. So that means if they're lucky, out of 60 credit, they might have 10 credits or less that addresses the issues going on with youth. One of the core classes that we will get will be adolescent psychology, which is great, of course. It talks about the theories of what's going on, the developmental stages, which people forget when they're actually dealing with their clients. But it's not telling you, well, how do you help someone with pornography issues? What's really going on in social media? What kind of skills? You have no requirement to actually work with youth. And so and many of our practice in terms of practicum, you might not have like continuity in terms of, oh, I might only see a client once. I could see a client 3 times. And so most people have actually less than 50 hours of experience with teens before they're even licensed. So I think it's really important to know when you're going in to meet with a therapist or future therapist, what kind of experience do they have? And many of the graduates being trained are reporting in their surveys they feel 40% feel unprepared for the work that they're doing. I meet several counselors who are a year post-grad saying, I still have no idea what I'm saying in the room. I'm just going in the room blind and hoping it goes well. And there's no other career or any other position that I know that you have a master's level and you would go in there and you feel that unprepared. It's very scary. Not to mention, the biases that are going on in providers. I think that's a very difficult thing to deal with. And now we have state bans, we have laws that are getting in the way. We have very confusing messages from our own medical boards, and I'm going to continue to talk about that. Finding providers that are taking health insurance, all of that is a real big limitation to what's going on. And then also, personally, the psychiatric medication that's going on with teens. I also was going to spend a little bit more time on this one, but I decided not to. But I just think it's important to note that they are saying that antidepressant and anti-anxiety scripts in pediatric primary care has trended upward with a 1.3 monthly increase post-pandemic. So we have in 2023, we have 1 in 7 adolescents who are on mental health medications, and with the average of 2 to 3 at a time. This is unprecedented. You would typically, when we were starting, this was not what you were seeing. The average age of onset and going on these medications are age 10 or 11 now, which is dramatically shifting how we understand what's going on in puberty. And we have very little training and very limited capacity to question it because we are not medical doctors. So although we are not medical doctors, we might notice that something's going on with our children that we're seeing, and we can't address it because most of them are on mental health medications that we can't address. Another thing, I mean, obviously, I don't want to go into it too much of what's happening in our youth, but obviously, social media is a big issue that I had no idea going into graduate school how to get ready. I still have yet to see, and I did check to see if there's updated courses on this, on social media, on effects of pornography, in particular with youth. And again, they do not. I mean, again, one of the closest courses you can get for youth is at-risk youth. And that's typically, we're talking about juvenile delinquency, foster care, a little bit more of an intense case, not just the general issues of what's going on. I want to just read a couple quotes from The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, which many of you probably know. One of those things he says with pornography's relational harm, easy access to online pornography is reshaping boys' understanding of sexuality. Unrealistic expectations about sex and bodies, potential for addiction and desensitization may interfere with motivation to pursue real romantic relationships. We are absolutely at this point. Gen Z became the first generation to go through puberty with a portal in their pockets that called them away into an alternative universe that was exciting, addictive, unstable, and unsuitable for children. The effects that I've seen on pornography on young kids is astounding, not on even young ones, on young men, on young women. I have more than ever before seeing kids being aware of themselves as sexual objects, which of course is going to lead them to some sort of psychic defense. They're going to need to do something like that, whether they perceive themselves as prey or being really uncomfortable that they are even a human that gets aroused at all. So as much as I have 15-year-olds talking about BDSM, very sexual, they know all the different terminologies, they can talk about it, but the actual doing of it, they're very detached from. Several teens that I meet have never had a sexual encounter, and when they go to have a sexual encounter, they have a very difficult time performing because they have only been in observer mode. So even in their sexual intimacy, there's a sort of a expectation to observe. So the way they want to have their positions is different. There's not a lot of curiosity in each other's bodies. They're not being really taught how to be lovers. They're being taught how to perform sexual acts. So again, I think just, that is impacting what is going on with our kids more than the parents probably know, more than the therapists know. I've worked a great deal, like I said, with therapists. We don't have a lot of training around how to even have difficult conversations. So many therapists don't know how to talk about this with their clients and how to address it. And there's a lot of we don't want to stigmatize pornography, and and it's okay. And while I understand there's probably some sort of place for pornography, it doesn't address the fact that it is dramatically shifting how kids understand themselves, how they view others, not to mention with the AI. I have clients and young teens who are taking pictures of each other and their teachers and everyone around them, which can automatically turn videos into sexual videos. So one of the ways they even kind of get used to their teachers and in some ways get off on it is, I'm going to turn my teacher into a sexual object giving me oral sex, and I'm going to have some sort of pull over them. So again, this very detached view of the embodied experience that's impacted them. And then the TikTok self-diagnosis trend, and I'm going to show you guys some. The neurodivergent term, right? So coined in the 1990s by sociologist Judy Singer as a part of the neurodiversity movement, which views neurological differences, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, as a natural variation rather than deficits. And ever since then, this has exploded. This has become a lot. We have now, and we'll talk about it, we have neurodivergent therapists that have their own directories. We have the rise of self-diagnosis. I spend more time with my teens going over all their possible diagnoses than probably talking about anything else. And I also wanted to show you just, and I'm sure you know, but the shift that has happened in terms of our expectations of social justice as clinicians, and social justice coming before helping others. And so there's been a push like never before, obviously, for the affirming only, neurodivergent friendly, and decolonizing your practice. And so I thought it would be just good if I could give you guys a little bit of an example of what's out there with therapists on TikTok talking about some of these really important topics. Okay, this is neurodivergent therapist.
I'm an autistic therapist, and one thing that I've seen frequently in the short time that I've been working with neurodivergent people is that many neurodivergent people have significant trauma due to past mental health professionals. So one of the core facets of working with autistic or other types of neurodivergent clients is validating those experiences and ensuring that they realize that what they went through is true trauma. Because a lot of therapists, myself included, were not educated in the neurodiversity affirming perspective. I had to seek out that education on my own to learn how to work with other autistic people like myself. Far too many therapists are still under the impression that autism and ADHD and other types of neurodivergence are a disorder. And that's just simply not true. And the results of having that perspective and treating clients in that way is catastrophic. The invalidation, the messaging that there's something wrong with you, the inability of clients to change their symptoms because their symptoms are related to neurodivergence and not a disorder is so demoralizing to clients that it literally can cause lasting trauma for them. Remember that neurodivergence is not just related to the brain, but it's related to the nervous system. So that fight or flight activation that you feel when you're invalidated or when you're dealing with someone who just simply does not understand your experiences can be really devastating, especially if you are struggling with things that are related to living in a world that is simply not designed for you. I've had multiple clients who struggle to even validate their own experiences because of how much they've been gaslit in their lives by mental health professionals. Viewing neurodivergence as a mental illness only causes trauma to the people who are receiving that type of therapy. Because not only is that then invalidating their own feelings and experiences, but it's also teaching them to invalidate themselves. They no longer have themselves as their biggest ally because they've been taught to distrust themselves. There's a lot of facets of neurodiversity affirming therapy that are really important, and I'd love to talk about more. So if you're interested, let me know.
So just give that example, because again, this is a therapist. Please, I hope no one is taking this as I'm trying to put down people who struggle with ADHD or autism. Those are real disorders, not, this is where it gets really confusing. It's disorders, it's not disorders, it's a label, it needs help, it's a nervous system thing, it's outside your brain, it's inside your brain. That's what gets very confusing. There's not an agreement on that. So this is just one of the examples I wanted to show you. Next one. Oh, this is fun. Okay. This is about decolonizing your practice.
Thanks to TikTok, I don't know what I did to get it. I don't even know what the requirements are in order to get it, but I got my 3 minutes. So let's talk about why ancestral healing is important for white people. Well, white supremacy is literally the absence of identity. That's what white supremacy does. Nothing more, nothing less. It strips people of their identity. Energetically, it is a black hole. What happens inside of black holes? Things disappear. They go away. So when we lean into healing ancestrally, and we are white people doing that work, and I say we because, again, my family's Irish. My grandmother came over from Ireland, but in that, somewhere, Irish people became white, and white is a system. So even me, I had to do some serious reconciliation with the idea that the Irish are strong as fuck, and they are warriors. They are still at war in Ireland, like North and South. There are still major issues that go on in Ireland, and they are strong warrior people. But the energetic pole of white supremacy inside of America was so strong that even they folded into the system of whiteness instead of choosing to stand in solidarity with other marginalized people, other marginalized European people, other marginalized black people. Like all of the others, if they would have come together, this system would have been broken. So I've created a space of intersectional ancestral healing where we can come together and get down to the roots of who we all actually are. Because
I'm gonna stop this one just because I didn't realize the time. I do want to get to some things. I that's just an important one because I do want to let you guys know in my practice, in terms of LMFT, we have been explicitly told to decolonize our practice. And I just felt like as an Irish person, I'm still learning what that means, but all of us therapists are told we got to do that in the room with your kids. So just thought that would be important to show. Let me show one more. This one's my least favorite, and you guys will probably know why. This is Affirming Therapist.
I'm a licensed therapist who provides gender-affirming care, and I wanted to take a moment of your time to just provide you with some translations, if you will. Your transition seems to be a little rushed, and I'm just worried that you might regret this someday. What they're really saying is, how can I get you to change your mind, and how can I slow this process down enough so that I believe you have ample time to change your mind, because that's what I'm really hoping you do. I don't know. I'm just not sure that this is right for you. How can you be sure that this is right for you? What they're really saying is, I know you better than you know you. So I'm going to say you're not trans. And I'm also going to say that because I'm just really uncomfortable because of it. But there were no indicators of you being trans when you were growing up. And trust me, I would know. What they're really saying is, I recognize that growing up, I did not facilitate an environment for you to develop in a healthy and self-directed way, and you were forced to hide your true self from me because I didn't approach you with curiosity or compassion. I approached you with, this is the way it is, and under my roof, you do as I say. Well, I don't see or know of any research that supports hormone replacement therapy or gender-affirming care for trans people. All I really see is that the news is reporting pretty consistently that this is a fad, it's popular, and hormone replacement therapy and gender-affirming care is actually really dangerous. What they're really saying is, I don't care to do the research, and because I'm waiting it out, hoping that miraculously you won't be trans anymore, I don't have to do it, and I don't have to care, and I can continue to watch Fox News and Tucker Carlson and really just absorb fully this misinformation and disinformation about you. Well, I just don't understand it, and I don't agree with it, and I never will. What they're really saying is, I am unwilling to extend any kind of compassion, curiosity, or empathy to you, despite you laying it out pretty clearly exactly what you need. So what you can expect from me is dismissiveness, alienation, discrimination, continued ignorance, and an unhealthy relationship.
So I just played that one because I think many of you guys can relate to being maybe just concerned about what's going on with kids, and they're being fed this online that any sort of questions that are not directly affirming is dismissive, unsupportive, and, like they said, downright unethical. Real quick, because I think it's important just to go over it, is their responses. This actually came out from the HHS document. And these are just some of the responses online regarding this. Differential diagnosis is pointless and may even be harmful. There's not data that any of these assessments make that outcome less likely. Trans kids know who they are. No gatekeeping here. Start blockers at HRT after our first chat if that feels right. Your body, your timeline. Not affirming trans youth is absolutely abusive. This will kill children. Parents are forcing onto their kids. It is abuse. All white cis therapists are violent colonizers. Decolonize your gender journey with me. No more gatekeeping bullshit. And this is Trans Visibility Week, and this is all, like I said, reported in that report. So I thought it would be real quick to just kind of go over the alphabet soup of therapists, because obviously there's many different types and a lot of them overlap, but some people don't really understand the difference, so I'm just going to go over them a little bit. A psychologist, this is a doctorate level professional. They are typically the ones that are conducting psychological assessments. They diagnose BPD, the ADHD, there's IQ tests, personality. This is the psychologist that's not in school. That's a separate one, a school psychologist. This is way more broad. The school psychologists have to be a little bit more focused. And this is someone that does not typically do a whole lot of therapy, although you will find a lot of these vary by state. So I am kind of focusing on New York State, but New York State and California tend to have probably the most stringent guidelines and requirements. So this is the higher end of what the expectations can be. Then we have the LMFTs, that's me. So you have a master's in marriage and family therapy plus 2,000 plus supervised hours. We do have the most in-person required hours, meaning, for example, a social worker, you could have 1,500 hours. You could have 200 of those that are only face-to-face, whereas my 2,000 hours have to be face-to-face. I don't get any hours for calling people, notes, or anything like that. We're going to really focus on relational issues, family systems. We were kind of developed to not diagnose because we were seeing families, but because of health insurance and whatnot, we are diagnosing people. We do see that, and we're big into private practice. We have the social workers. Again, they're very similar, but you'll see more social work is going to be a lot more political in nature in their programming, their expectations, and they're going to work in a lot more facilities, and they might work alongside the therapy. They don't always have to be the clinicians. They can work at a lot of the different facilities. Licensed mental health counselor, similar to all the other ones, but they are really working on general counseling, behavioral issues, anxiety, depression, using all different types of approaches. You have the LPC, which again, is interchangeable with the LMHC. They're the most similar in what their degrees are going to look like. Just like we don't have LPCs in New York State in terms of graduate schools, but it's interchangeable. Whereas Texas, there's going to be a lot more LPCs. They are really supposed to be like career, personal development, and mental health challenges, but they are again more of the career, personal coach end. And we have the school psychologist. So this is the person in school that will do the diagnostic testing for the ADHDs, for the autism. They're also going to work alongside the actual psychologist, but they're going to do assessments in schools only. They're only going to write IEPs, 504s, but their expectation is that it's just writing for in school. They're not generalists that are going to talk about what's going on at home. I included the MTC BC licensed music therapist. I have an 8-year-old daughter who I really thought that did not need talk therapy, but my ex-husband did want her to go to therapy, so we met in the middle, and I hired a music therapist, which I think has been really great. They work with the autism. You'll see them at anorexia clinics, cancer clinics. That's where they tend to be funded the most, but they use music-based interventions to deal with things. So, I mean, I really like the mental health help that could be nonverbal. And we have the school counselor, and I think this is really important to point out that school counselors, they are KCREP accredited. That is very different than any other of these degrees. They cannot diagnose mental illness, and they cannot provide therapy in most states, clinical therapy. So what they're doing in school is they're doing the social emotional learning. That's kind of how they're getting away with it, where they're talking about mental health issues, but their claim is they're not diagnosing it. They're not per se treating it. They're supposed to, the school counseling, they only have 600 hours of an internship in a school setting. And again, that could be degree planning, all different types of issues. That's not one-on-one counseling. Schools, I mean, they do use their school counselors, but they are trying to bring counselors in who tend to be the LMHCs. So I just want to give you a little bit difference of that. One of the things I don't think people realize working in this is just how difficult it is for us therapists, and fear and hesitation around therapy. I hear this from a lot of fellow therapists because of the misinformation and the concerns around our professional licensing and our expectations. Every sort of section has their own code of ethics. So LMFT have their own code of ethics. The Academy of Counseling does. Association, the social workers do. But they all overlap a little bit with client autonomy, non-discrimination, and cultural competency. I will say, and this is my opinion, that unfortunately, and I went into LMFT, we were the most known in working with gender, and now I think we are the most extreme. So I just want to give you a little bit of sense of my code of ethics. Number one, if you are not trained in youth gender issues, you need to refer to a specialist right away, because you need to have an affirmative model. What gets really confusing about this, and when we talk to therapists, I'll talk to you a little bit more, is the wording of you should affirm. There's not exactly you need to affirm, but there is should. So there's a very confusing line of what would be incorrect. People get called on their license for a lot of things. So I think there's a lot of counselors that are very scared. One of the things I just want to point out, it says that we need to not change their identity. We have to prioritize the child's voice. In terms of our newest guidelines, we have to emphasize interventions for trans, non-binary, and gender expansive youth. I'm not even going to read what that means. We have 4 different categories we have to not discriminate against. We have gender, we have sex, parentheses, medical conditions, gender identity, gender expression, and gendered experience, in which we're all expected to attend to all of those. And then any gender identity change efforts, gatekeeping, which could be, can we just wait and see before we suggest hormones, is considered unethical and harmful, as they violate the informed consent and can make dysphoria worse. So we are supposed to push it as much as we can. And it's very similar with social workers, and they even have an active duty to challenge discrimination, to challenge it, to fight against it. So that's really what's going on in our field in terms of expectations. Real quick, I just kind of want to go over the common therapy modalities. We have CBT, right, which many of us probably know, we identify negative thought patterns and we replace them. This is very common. This is one of the most common therapy modalities. One, I think it's insurance based, a lot of worksheets, and nothing wrong with worksheets, but some of this is a lot of newer therapists rely on this worksheet homework to replace a little bit of the natural soft skills of relational building and actually being able to walk people through things. Not that, again, there's nothing wrong with it, but I do think a lot of people say they do CBT, but that's a catch-all phrase. We have ACT, which is a newer type of therapy, which I tend to like. I learned ACT with helping veterans, and this encourages people to accept difficult emotions while committing to what their actual values are. And this is really good, but again, this is a little bit more difficult with youth. A lot of treatment is insight-based, and frankly, that's just not always what these teens need, is just more insight. DBT is really good, dialectical behavioral therapy. You'll see a lot of DBT groups. In order to do DBT, you get really good training. So I think this is great for a start. We see a lot of this, like I said, with personality disorders. That seems to help them a lot. Couples do great with that. We have psychodynamic, which this explores the unconscious conflicts, early experiences, and patterns. I think this is a really great type of therapy. Unfortunately, a lot of times insurance coverage is limited with that. It's longer, and a lot of our expectations is we got to get this done quick. We have EMDR, that's the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. This is a newer thing too, and there's some disagreement, some of how often we should go with the youth. Most of this has been done with adults, so I think you're gonna see a little bit more of the EMDR and the somatic experiencing. I didn't put that on here. Somatic is really great if someone's doing it right. Unfortunately, a lot of counselors believe that anything that they are even doing that's related to nervous system work is somatic, and it's often not. So you got to be careful a little bit about that. We have family systems, which is obviously, that's what I look at. We view problems as a family, and we try to improve the dynamics. And we have solution-focused brief therapy. This is, again, a lot of insurances like this. This is short-term for crisis. When you call a crisis hotline, you're in the middle of a psychiatric episode, we might be using that. So this is where I think we get into some of the really important things, and I know time's kind of limited, so I might kind of go through this fast because I want to get you guys to some questions to ask when we go into the room with therapists. The importance is we want to look for for therapists and clinicians that are developmentally informed. And what does that even mean? What does it mean to be developmentally informed? Well, first and foremost, right, they need to understand that teens, they're dealing with identity exploration and identity formation, right? We got to know if this distress is related to neurodiversity, right? Sexuality concerns, just regular, hey, I'm going through this stage of my life, right? And they say Erik Erikson, stage of identity versus role confusion. That's about ages 12 to 18. This is where they actually experiment with different roles and presentations and how they present their gender. So we really want to make sure that someone knows that that's okay, and that's what we should be doing. This is a normal process that they share, that they explore their identities, right? They have to understand the mental health comorbidities. I mean, first and foremost, if someone is suicidal or can't go to school, the last thing that you need to just be pushing on them is socially transitioning or changing anything in a dramatic sense that's going to impact them that you don't know, or overlooking other issues with OCD. I mean, we never know if one thing is making the other worse. And teens have a lot of black and white thinking. So you really have to look at this. Not to mention, like the social, parasocial. Parasocial is now how we're understanding their relationships with the technology, their peers, how have they lived online. Many of our youth have lived a full life online in terms of what they've tried, where they've gone, VR, friendships, and these VR and online relationships are giving them things that their family can't give them. So you want to know that someone's talking to them about that, understanding that, including the family, right? What's going on? Do they understand the social contagion element to this? The informed consent and irreversibility risks, right? Like how cognitively ready are some of these kids to consent to this treatment? How does that therapist acknowledge that, work within that? What are the expectations with that? And then really importantly is the long-term well-being. Too often this is, hey, we get you to this place and we're never going to see you again. Not looking at, hey, if you make some of these decisions, this is dramatically going to shift every single interaction that's going to happen from now on with your social, medical, occupational, and a lot of the therapy is not informed in that. So I think that's really important. And I think we underestimate using age appropriate language and pacing. A 10-year-old is different than a 14-year-old and is different than a 17-year-old, and we need to talk to them differently. I tell clinicians, if you are using the word anxiety with a 10-year-old, it's probably inappropriate. Most adults don't realize that anxiety is a sensation that starts in your body. And without that, they couldn't believe excitement is anxiety, arousal is anxiety, sadness is anxiety, sadness is depression. So there is a lot of concerns with how we are speaking to children as if they're mini adults, and they are not mini adults. And I think that is one of the things that we overlook, and we are talking to these little kids just because they present these big words to us, and we go along with them instead of putting some clear guidelines into what they're doing. So people ask me all the time, what should I look at when I'm talking to therapists, when I'm considering therapy for my kid? And I'm here to say a lot of things, especially in the last 6 months. 6 months to, has it been about, we're almost at a year, I guess, of this administration, but let's say 6 months since we've had major bans, major kind of cultural realizations that the transgender experience is going to be impacted. So we have counselors of all types freaking out. And I say that because I know very smart counselors, caring counselors who've done great work, who put pronouns on their bios, not because they necessarily buy into this ideology, but because they're told this is a nice person. I've asked people and they said, well, I just don't like to leave a form blank. So I put in, my gender identity or expression. So it's not always as easy as, okay, I'll take them to the non-pronoun person, or even if, do you affirm or not affirm? I mean, really, if you ask a lot of therapists that's going to scare them. And sometimes the people that are outwardly saying, I do not affirm, is also not potentially a great ideal therapist, because we don't even know the landscape in which we're about to embark on. I mean, detransitioners, understanding if they can be detransitioners, medically harmed. There's so many different identities that people are going to come in with, and having any sort of fixed idea or outcome is very dangerous for therapy, and is very dangerous for your client, because a lot of these kids may not be able to detransition, may not be able to reverse some of the things that have been done that's harmed them, and also just risking putting them in groups and group identity. So we really want to be careful with the kind of therapy we're seeking out. Also, with the bans, I will say some therapists are going full out and they'll say, hey, screw the ban, come anyways. I'll still affirm you in 2 sessions. But a lot of therapists have now just taken off the LGBTQ off their website. So they don't get called, because in Texas you'll have clinicians calling on clinicians who are affirming. You'll have clinicians in Colorado calling on clinicians that aren't referring. So a lot of people are not putting out what they really believe, but some are. Some are going to tell you straight up, I'm the neurodivergent, non-binary, lived experience Buddhist therapist, and I'm here for you. And that's really easy to see if that's what you want, but some won't. So we're going to have to ask different questions, and we're going to have to kind of work with therapists to have them get back to doing the work that they were meant to do. So some of the questions I talk about, just how do you determine if my child's dysphoria is consistent over time? And what methods do you use to screen them for conditions like autism or trauma? Be very careful around saying, have you read the WPATH guidelines or the WPATH files or the CAS review? Because they haven't, I can promise you. And, you know, we are told that we have to follow the WPATH guidelines, and in some sense, the WPATH guidelines even say watchful waiting is okay. So it gets confusing for some people where they think, all right, yeah, I'm still going to follow WPATH guidelines. That doesn't necessarily mean they would recommend your kid for anything, but that question gets people scared because they're told they have to. So instead, you know, I kind of just suggest you ask what they do to keep up and informed. I ask them, how many youth concerns have you supported? Across what ages? Can you describe progress patterns? So really, don't hesitate to ask, what will it look like if my kid actually gets better? What is your expectation for kids? Because a lot of times we just sit here and wait for the kid, wherever the kid takes us. No, nope, that's not acceptable. Family involvement. How will you engage us in centering my child's perspective? What if views differ on step forwards? You don't necessarily, again, want to come up and tell them, I am this way and I have these expectations and I have concerns. It's more putting on them. You know, like, how do you work with people who views this differently? What are you going to do? What benefits and risks come with affirming school or medical steps at this stage? Are you open to discussing studies on lasting effects? Is your therapist even willing to look at your child individually instead of saying all kids or most kids? Will they be willing to say, you know what, yeah, if there's some serious concerns in terms of suicidality or a personality disorder, I'm absolutely going to address that before I even think about affirming or suggesting that. If we start therapy with skills for coping, what will we target? We want therapists to be clear. You have to understand, when you get a medical treatment, especially through insurance, there is an expectation that that person is having objectives according to a treatment goal and is diagnosing and assessing your child. It is not supposed to be a free-for-all. So they need to have targets, and they need to be able to express to you what is going on. You are allowed to, depending on what state you are, right? Given the laws, how do you balance compliance with ethical priorities? What if blocker hormone access shifts? I mean, I think a lot of people who are working in states where it was up in the air, I mean, these were difficult conversations we had to have with parents and with the kids, because the intensity of the ban also makes kids going through gender-related distress feel really unsafe and really uneasy. Big one is, what groups or peers do you suggest for family? How do you tackle school or friend-related challenges? You want them to be really dealing with the issues with teens and adolescents, which is their peer dynamics. How do they actually go in it? This is not a substitute best friend. A therapist is not your kid's best friend or not supposed to be there to parent them. Confidentiality limits. What might you need to loop in protective services or doctors? The more people you can get in the care, the better. Not just yourself, but other doctors, other clinicians, just because it should be all encompassing. There should be many ways to look at your kid and many ways to look at helping them, and they should be willing to work with others. And what indicates we're on track, and how do we shift to ongoing support or termination? We want to talk about getting out of therapy. There's a lot, and I've had clients for 15 years, and so I also know like relationship is important, but they come and go and they still reach objectives, and then they might have new ones. But with teens, again, you would be promoting them expanding their social horizons, not only having one person, an adult that is not really going to be close to them, knowing their most intimate details. We want to make sure that we're expanding them further. And then just real quick, I'm going to end with a couple things, and these are just things to kind of think about. And this is for if your child's in therapy, and this is if you're in therapy, because I will tell you, when people talk about, I have clients who have desisted, detransitioned, and I do a lot of work with parents, and most of my desistance and my detransitioning has come with the work that parents have done on themselves, and we cannot underestimate. I would tell you to go to therapy before you send your child to therapy for this issue. That doesn't change that we're still going to have to find a competent therapist, right? But I just want to really state that, because sometimes we're just sending our kids away to get treated and not really taking an active shared path. Some of the things you could ask him is just like, what strength in my child stood out the most last time, and how can I reinforce that with them? Make this, again, what skills and what positives are they getting from this? Picture an ideal day for my child in 3 months. What is therapy doing to contribute to that? What ownership does a therapist take in, like, I'm going to help this person get better. I want to contribute to the betterment of this child's life and to the family life. How has my child's grasp of their emotions grown since starting, and what progress points have emerged? This is where, again, you're not fighting with the therapist. You want to work together. You want to expand it, because the work is done outside the room. You don't want to just rely on the 50 minutes a week or whatever it is to get the points across. What inquiries are you planning to raise with my child soon, and how can I back that up? Right? I mean, this is where, hey, we have school issues, we have technology, taking care of self, comfortable with body. What are we doing next? How can I help that? Not how can I mandate, what people should I force? No, what are we going to do to back up the positives? And a good question, anonymously, how does my child's path align with others their age? What common threads or distinct features are different, and what are not, right? So you want them, again, push them to think about, okay, yeah, how normal is it this age that kids don't have peer relationships or do have sexual relationships or only have relationships online? How does this impact in terms of how many kids, I mean, if you have a 10-year-old who wants to go in for dysphoria, how many 10-year-olds do you have with dysphoria? Especially with the younger, you should be hearing that a great majority of them ended up being resolved and living as their biological sex. So that should be something that comes out. And then for a parent, it's like, how could my gender-related thoughts link to earlier patterns? Any initial thoughts? The way you react to your child, I'm telling you, although it's one of the most, I don't know what prepares you for it, so I don't think it's like any other issue, but how you react to it probably does say a lot to how you regulate, how you are going to be able to co-regulate with your child. So being free to say, how does the way I come across about how I'm dealing with my child's distress, what do you think that impacts? What do you notice about my life and the patterns of that? If I noted one question this week, what would you recommend to advance our focus? This is often where I tell, like, my parents, okay, what's going on with you that there's such a perception of loss that's not there? How can you experience this loss and not put it on your child? Like, things like that. They should be able to give you these questions to enable you to start looking at yourself and enable you to be able to have closer relationships with your child. How has your take on my progress changed recently, and what prompted it? You want to ask them and really get a lot of feedback on, where am I learning in this? Where am I still struggling? Where am I getting stuck? Where is my fears? Because a lot of this is fears. How do I manage fears while implementing boundaries? And this is where you're going to hope of, like, I've seen you implement loving and caring boundaries with your child that wasn't rigid, that wasn't fear-based. That's what kind of stuff we're looking at. What outside tools, reading groups do you think I'd connect with? Again, this is not where let's send you to Oasis or whatever that is overly affirming, but other outside tools, right? This is what you would hope your therapist is thinking about. Grief, is thinking about alienation of parents. Many of these parents are facing or already are facing cutoff. So what kind of readings, what kind of knowledge do they have on the alienated parent, on what that experience is like, and reunification? Do these people have any experience with reunification? What does it take? What do I need to deal with when I am so hurt by what my child is going through? How can you reconcile that these therapists are telling my child that the best way to handle who they are is to make sure that they never that none of them ever exist again, that the last child, that the legacy will end with them. That's how awesome that they are, that the legacy is going to end with them and they can't have any other children. Help me understand why that is such a beautiful thing. That's the kind of stuff you want to be talking about. And then in uncertain times, what nudge would you offer about trusting my instincts? Not the most, but one of the most devastating things that I see is that parents and kids are not trusting their instincts. Everyone around them is telling them, just accept your child, just get over it, just walk alongside them. Do you want to lose them? And how do I continue to be there for my child without just ignoring who I am, without just ignoring the instinct that I think my child is not okay? And let's move within that. Why am I actually feeling that my child is not okay? Is that because of what I'm hearing? Where is the room for hope? And even, what does hope look like after transition, and not just, again, the acceptance of the fixed identity is a little bit of the importance. So that is what I have for today, and I would love questions, and I thank you all for listening. Again, I know I said a lot. I do hope that there was some sort of questions that I gave you, or some sort of information that you can use going out into therapy. I love being a therapist. I think it's, again, a great honor to be with families and helping them, but I have a lot of fears around the alienation and what's going on in our field. But please reach out to me if anyone ever has any questions, and you can follow me on X or contact me through LGBT Courage Coalition. Yeah.
Thank you, Sara. Yeah. So do you have a few minutes? We've got a couple questions. Okay.
Absolutely.
So I'll just start from the top. Mm-hmm. What do you think the best qualifications for therapy academically are? Lots of people call themselves therapists with few qualifications. What do you think is the best academically?
Well, that's difficult, right? I mean, funny enough, the only therapist is really the licensed and marriage-friendly therapist. So a therapist, typically in nature, meant you have way more of a clinical one-on-one with a client versus I might just be looking at you and assessing it, and I don't even have one-on-one. So I want to say someone that would call themselves a therapist, but that's not always I don't know. More academics does not equal anything, sadly. I mean, I really would actually promote postgraduate youth training. If you find people that have had postgraduate youth certifications, I'd be way more inclined to think that matters. And yes, you are typically not allowed to call yourself a therapist unless you have a license, but a lot of people say they do counseling that don't have licensing. So that's where it gets really confusing.
All right. Is there any advice for a parent that discovers that their teen is addicted to porn?
Yeah. Yes. Well, lots of advice. I mean, obviously, talking to them about it, which again can be really hard and a lot of shame. Um, Finding a therapist that deals with this. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of help with addictions to porn. Unfortunately, we're not seeing a lot of young yet. So that's coming, right? We're still having the sex addiction. There is a lot of programs in terms of like, magic screen times, blocking the porn. But all of the porn addiction treatment that I've seen has been very Christian based, which again, it's not horrible, but it's very shame ridden. So there isn't a lot for porn addiction yet, fortunately.
Good to know. Okay. I'm gonna skip one and then come back to it. It seems like parents or individuals might need to know a lot of what questions to ask while interviewing a prospective therapist, and then during that kind of therapeutic process. Would you agree that we're kind of in like a consumer-based model where they must be aware that there are many therapists who, like, you're trying to find a personal fit, but in fact, just because they're licensed, doesn't ensure that they're competent. So do you think there's just a lot that people need to go into ready to do that interview process?
Yeah, I do. And that assumes you have the right? I mean, that's that's almost like the private practice. I will say that weirdly enough, like a child advocacy center, which is something that's typically like if you had a child who was sexually assaulted, would go in and get a regimented program. Those are like 80% effective, very, very well studied, evidence-based, short term. They don't rely on the forever. So those things are great, but you're not always going to have a high intense issue, right? So yes, I think we're all sort of aware of that. I mean, in some ways, like psychology today tells you, are you are you a fat therapist, are you a Muslim therapist? There's all these types of therapists. So I think a lot of therapists are even like happy to let you know their personal proclivities and what they want to talk about in therapy. So kind of look at that and go away. But yeah, I mean, I think interviewing is really important. I mean, I don't think you want to sit alongside your brain surgeon while they're doing it. That's not, so it's very different around, it's very personal, but you actually want them to be very professional. Not telling you, if they tell you about their ADHD and this is what I always tell people, if they tell you about their ADHD on the first session, go, run far.
But are you worried that that's like the vast majority of the newer trained coming out therapists? Okay, so
80% at least, yeah.
Okay, so if people are seeking a therapist for themselves, for their child, be prepared that you're might have a long process to get to the right person.
Yes, and the extremes are almost the ones to maybe kind of stay away from. You'll be surprised around the middle ground therapist who just wants to do good therapy. They're not going to say, I'm not going to affirm, but if they like show any hesitation of, oh yeah, I realize other issues are important. It's a lot of times you actually can teach a therapist something. I mean, there are so many things that I come across that I don't know a lot about that clients have to explain to me. So yeah, no, you don't want to fully have to explain the CAS review or something to someone, but people don't know. And I find therapists, again, they want to help, they want to know, they want to do the right thing. So if they know more information, they'll be more inclined to help out.
All right. Any final words? We've got where we can have people reach out and meet you on your last screen.
That's
And
it. There's no other questions.
let's see, there was one more. Okay. Many years ago, developmental psychology, Piaget, Erickson, was the undergrad and grad level education. However, it seems now the current mental health and therapist education has moved away from that and is now so ideologically based. If there is no truth, an emphasis on person as expert on him or herself, how much, if any, of this can be attributed to postmodernist ideology?
Almost all of it, right? I mean, we don't get any of the PJ training in grad school. That's all undergrad. And then you have to understand, you don't need an undergrad in psych to go, or human, you don't need an undergrad in any of that to go into grad schools. And so you could have an engineering bachelor's degree and go in and get a counseling degree. The counseling degrees are more on advocacy and LGB lived experience. I mean, a lot of my classes where I had to pretend I was gay or poor and go out in the world and talk about that experience. I only had one class where I had tests, and that was a psychopathology, that's diagnosing. So it's all about diagnosing and the social advocacy part. There's a lot of issues with the political climate and a lot of confusion within our field around what does our code of ethics mean and our standards. Yeah.
This is an interesting kind of question, kind of just putting it out there.
Mm-hmm.
Someone was looking for a therapist for their daughter a few years ago, and they had a real hard time even getting anyone willing to give them that interview time.
Mm-hmm.
On one occasion, the office staff actually required them to give all of their insurance info before they'd even schedule the interview, and then ended up charging them for it.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a fun one because I have been of one mind and I've come around to it. So some places, right, like offer a 15-minute consultation. That was a thing. I did not for a very long time. This could have easily been a client talking about me. I go under, because of the seriousness of it, I don't do interviews without payment because people record me. People record therapists and what they're saying. So understand that some of the hesitation can be, and I don't think that's a couple years ago, but can be, what are you doing? What are you actually trying to find out? Do you interview, again, your primary care physician? Because sometimes the questions can come across as like you're questioning their competence, as you should, but like that's not easy for most people to hear and to cope with and to deal with. So, I mean, unfortunately, I would take the hit and meet with them once, if that means you have to pay for it. I now do some consultations, right? But that has to be, you have to kind of email me with some words that make sense. If you send me an email that gets me a little bit alarmed, I'm not gonna talk to you without you putting your own real name, because people reach out to me with fake names. They reach out. So that is a difficult question. And again, I get 20 inquiries a day. I can't spend all that time with 15 minutes. So, maybe finding a couple questions that an email, again, these questions of what does it look like when a kid is doing well, that should be an easy question for them to ask. So really frame the consultation as, hey, I want to, see what has been positive and what you have seen work, because a lot of people don't even know what makes people change and how people get better. So keep it around, how have you helped? I want to know so much. I want to know your best case, your best outcome, all of that.
That's great. Well, again, Sarah, thank you so much. And I am just going to briefly plug our next lecture.
Awesome. My favorite.
So in December, we're going to hear from Joe Burgo, and we have started creating our lineup for the next 6 months after that.
Awesome.
We will be hearing from Anita Bartholomew, author of recently published book Sacrificial Lambs. We're going to hear from Jennifer Say from XXXY. We're going to hear from Andy No, the gay journalist who is in the East Coast and now lives in London, who has a lot of insight into radicalization and domestic terrorism. And we're going to hear from attorney from the UK, Dennis Kavanagh. So we are already putting together our lineup for the next 6 months after this. And as you know, Sarah's lecture will be up as a recording, and then 6 months out, we're going to put all of these lectures up on our website so people can find them. As we know, you guys have really great information to share.
Yeah, and I just want to put out there, the person that asked about the porn addiction, feel free to email me. I put my email on there, or email Jamie, and if that's comfortable, and get it to me. I might have some more ideas locally. I mean, again, there's no like center yet or one program, but I work with porn addiction. I do know some elements of that. So feel free to reach out for that. I'll give you a free consultation.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Everyone, thank you for joining us and have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.